Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a fascinating stack of sources here, all focused on the incredible story and unique character of Iceland.
Hmm.
This deep dive is specifically tailored for you, our listener, if you want to cut through the noise, get thoroughly informed quickly, and, find those real aha moments about this island nation.
That's right. We've pulled exclusively from these documents. We've got academic papers, historical accounts, geographical surveys, and we're going to guide you through this material.
And our mission, really, is to distill the most important insights from all these sources. We want to understand how Iceland, right from its beginnings, its settlement,
Yeah.
through centuries of challenge up to the modern day, has been profoundly shaped by its one-of-a-kind geography, its resilient culture, and the external forces it's faced.
Right. We'll try to highlight the key turning points, those characteristics that really define it today.
So let's start right at the beginning, setting the scene with maybe the most fundamental influence, Iceland's geography.
Absolutely. Our sources really emphasize it's a very young island, geologically speaking, and it's locked in this perpetual dance, this creation and destruction by fire and ice.
Fire and ice, it's not just a, poetic description, is it?
Not at all. It's located right on the seam, the divergent boundary, where the North American and Eurasian tectonic plates are pulling apart.
Huh.
And the sources also call it a hotspot, driven by volcanism from a deep mantle plume.
So that explains the volcanoes. And geographically, it sits on the northern edge of Europe, but much farther west than the British Isles.
Exactly, just south of the Arctic Circle.
Mhm.
And this positioning creates a landscape that's a direct product of, intense volcanic activity, massive glaciations, and relentless erosion.
Wow.
It's geologically young, a wild mosaic of ecosystems and landforms. You often get these incredibly stark, even extreme environments side by side.
So you might see dramatic variations in coastlines or microclimates just a few miles apart.
Precisely. It's quite concentrated.
And it's deceptively small in scale, isn't it?
Yeah.
About 103,000 square kilometers.
That's right, which makes it the second largest island in Europe after Great Britain.
But small, yet packed with geological drama, you're saying.
Oh, definitely. Active volcanoes, truly remarkable geothermal energy resources, hot springs, geysers plus rift valleys, vast lava fields, rugged mountains.
Sounds incredible.
Yeah, the sources point out that you can basically observe geological history spanning thousands of years concentrated in a very small area.
That location on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, it must have acted as a sort of physical barrier between continents. That seems pretty unique in human terms.
Absolutely. And here's a really interesting insight from the sources. Almost uniquely in Europe, apart from maybe the Netherlands, Iceland is the largest continuous landmass without any land borders.
Yeah, land borders at all.
None. Which meant, it didn't have a sort of preordained destiny shaped by immediate neighbors.
Right.
When the first settlers arrived, it was, in a significant way, a blank canvas.
That's a powerful idea, a blank canvas. Speaking of settlers, our sources mentioned some earlier, maybe even legendary visits before the main event.
Yeah, there are stories in Irish annals, figures like Pythias perhaps mistaking it for the mythical Thule. Apparently, even early map-making struggled with the persistent cloud cover.
Huh. Okay. So reliable accounts come later.
Right. The pivotal moment is the Viking settlement around 874 AD. Our sources describe these settlers as primarily flock owners from Western Scandinavia.
Flock owners, so farmers.
Yes, very likely from Norway, and there's evidence like a seal penny found in a grave that points that way.
So these weren't just raiders passing through. They were establishing farms, bringing their livestock, sheep, goats, cattle, horses, dogs.
Exactly. They arrived on an island dominated by native birds, mammals, and, interestingly, large tracts of Arctic birch forest back then.
Forests.
They brought their know-how, their land use practices, including this concept of the ship farm, the idea of drawing pasture land around a central landing point. And pasture itself was absolutely key. It's described as the ultimate source of wealth and power.
Wealth and power from grass.
You can imagine the potential they saw. Sources suggest the lowlands alone could theoretically have supported millions of animals.
Wow, millions. That sounds like immense potential, but maybe also a lot of pressure on a fragile ecosystem.
That's a very good point. This early society started to take shape, giving rise to something like a feudal aristocracy with strong cultural ties back to Norway.
Okay.
Local power sort of coalesced around clans, like the Otsons and Stirlings are mentioned, but our sources highlight that their rivalries often spiraled into pretty significant strife.
Right. Internal conflict.
And that strife led directly to a really crucial development to try and maintain some order, the establishment of the Althing.
The Althing. Okay. When was that?
In the summer of 930 AD at a place called Thingvellir.
Thingvellir.
The sources frame this as a direct response to maybe the individualism of the settlement period. It was an attempt to replace destructive blood feuds with some form of civil authority.
So it's basically one of the oldest continuously operating parliaments anywhere. That's fascinating.
It really is. And it wasn't just some abstract legal idea. The sources suggest it was both a pragmatic political necessity for these, transmigrants trying to build a society from scratch, and also deeply tied to the personal ambitions of the early settlers wanting to assert their authority.
Makes sense. Yeah. And Thingvellir itself, the location.
It's in this dramatic rift valley. It quickly gained a reputation as sort of holy ground, a place where the sheer grandeur of nature seemed to mirror the historical drama unfolding.
Wow.
The law speaker, the person who recited the laws aloud, held court there.
And the legacy of this early period is pretty remarkable, according to these sources, right?
Yeah.
They mention a complete vernacular literature.
Yes, calling it the first national literature in Europe written in a modern language, which is quite something.
Well, it is something.
And alongside that, they developed this system of governance seen as quite rational, arguably unparalleled elsewhere in Europe at that specific time.
But that period of self-governance didn't last forever.
No, unfortunately. Around 1262, after a period of internal political crisis within what's called the Old Icelandic Commonwealth, Iceland fell under the power of Norway.
Ah. The sources mention some Icelanders had this rather ambitious, failed plan to actually seize Norway.
Yeah, that didn't quite work out. Instead, they ended up accepting the Norwegian king, supposedly on their own terms.
Supposedly.
Which sadly marked the start of a long period of decline. Iceland found itself ruled from a distant, often corrupt court in Norway.
And what happened to that local aristocracy, the clans?
Well, their power diminished significantly. They became more like clients of the distant crown rather than independent power brokers.
And our sources stress how different Iceland's path became compared to, say, Denmark and Norway.
Exactly. Where distinct national states and cultures were really solidifying, Iceland felt increasingly cut off culturally, despite that amazing early flowering of its own language and literature.
So the union with Norway from 1264, that later shifted.
Yes, it shifted to Danish rule by about 1380, and this period really intensified with Danish absolutism starting in 1662.
Absolutism. What did that mean in practice?
It meant legal decisions were increasingly made in Copenhagen, often completely disregarding Icelandic needs or wishes.
Ouch. And it gets worse, right? The Althing.
Yeah, the Althing, that great symbol of early self-governance, was completely abolished in 1800.
Abolished.
Its functions were reduced to just a Supreme Court, so you effectively had a court governing instead of a parliament. Icelanders lost nearly all their political rights.
The sources describe Iceland during these centuries as unloved and isolated, even facing hardships like having to learn Danish.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
A really difficult period. And amidst this challenging time under foreign rule and isolation, the sources highlight a truly devastating event.
Uh-oh.
The arrival of the Black Death around 1349.
Oh, wow. The Black Death reached Iceland, too.
It did. And the descriptions are grim, catastrophic devastation, widespread illness, death, horrible sights and smells. It apparently hit the southern islands first.
The impact on society must have been just profound.
Sources speak of utter hopelessness. People fled farms for towns, only to find the plague raging there, too. Farms were deserted, livestock died, water sources dried up, fish catches were ruined, apparently hordes of rats everywhere. Towns became virtually uninhabitable.
Unimaginable. And how did the Icelanders interpret this disaster?
Well, this is particularly revealing. While people elsewhere had various theories, divine punishment, blaming kings, sorcery, Icelanders apparently had a specific, unified view. It was punishment for pursuing the pagan lot, a kind of direct reprisal from nature, closely linked to a natural violent weather, raging storms, huge waves, strong currents.
Wow. So they connected it directly to the environment and maybe their past beliefs.
Yes. There's even a specific eerie account mention of a great cry heard for 3 hours on Good Friday Eve during that time.
Chilling. Okay, let's shift forward to the 1700s, 19th century. We start seeing a new spirit emerging, seeds of a cultural awakening.
Yes, influenced by the wider Age of Enlightenment. Sources highlight extensive efforts led by Icelanders themselves. Figures like Bishop Franz Skuli are mentioned focused on domestic education and intellectual development. Learned interests gained ground.
So things were starting to happen internally.
Definitely. New institutions popped up, like public halls and societies. The debate in Reykjavik is named to encourage criticism and discussion.
And a press.
This period saw the rise of a local press. The first Icelandic newspaper dates to 1785, and importantly, the first one published in the Icelandic language came out in 1842.
That feels significant, publishing in their own language again.
Hugely significant. It sparked a cultural shift. Academics turned to factual writing, poets began crafting new stories and rhymes, and the island's own incredible geology and nature started inspiring novels, often drawing heavily on ancient Icelandic themes.
So reconnection with their own landscape and history.
Absolutely. There was a real movement to collect and preserve people's fables, idioms, unique forms of speech. It was a true revival of their heritage.
And the old sagas.
The old sagas were, as one source poetically puts it, dreamed younger. They were blended with ancient poetry and new Romantic-era elements. A college was even dedicated specifically to national literature.
Wow.
Poets, the skalds, began to express real pride in matching the level of the great sagas of the past.
And this cultural revival,
Yeah.
it directly fed into the national awakening of the 19th century.
Directly. The key figures were individuals who delved into history, rediscovering these long-neglected literary treasures, the sagas, old tales, hymns, poems.
And this literature became vital for the language itself.
Absolutely vital. It served as the primary source for reconstituting the Icelandic language, emphasizing its close relationship being cognate to Old Norse. Essentially, by studying these old texts, they were consciously bringing their language back towards its ancient roots, highlighting its distinctiveness.
So language and literature were central to this reclaiming of identity.
Central. And the introduction of printing technology was crucial here, obviously. It provided the foundation for this wider enlightenment, making these rediscovered Icelandic books available to more people.
This must have created a powerful bond among Icelanders.
A very powerful shared bond. This common ownership of ancient literature, steeped in affection for the land, their shared history, the unique language. It fostered a deep sense of sympathy and unity.
Like finding a common cause.
Exactly. A love for these old tales and songs opened a common channel for their collective aspirations. Our sources even note opposition from the Danish government to some of these movements, leading to officials resigning in protest.
Interesting. And there were still some links to Norway during this time.
Yes, the sources mention things like church buildings spurred by visitors from Norway, showing that connections weren't entirely severed despite the political situation.
So this growing sense of cultural and national identity, which sources trace back maybe even centuries, really became a new dimension with this 19th century national movement.
Yes, and this laid the essential groundwork for the formal push towards independence.
Right, so the political steps followed the cultural shift.
Pretty much. The Althing was resurrected in 1845, though its legislative power was initially shared with the Danish king. Officials increasingly worked to foster communication supporting newspapers, teaching Icelandic in schools.
And there was that big anniversary celebration.
Yes, the 1000th anniversary of the settlement in 1874, a really symbolic and important event, explicitly reinforcing their commitment to their ancestral land.
Then came Home Rule in 1904. What did that entail?
That allowed Iceland to elect its own parliament and take control over reforms in areas like commerce and communications.
So, more autonomy.
Definitely. As Icelandic representation in the Danish parliament grew, so did the pressure. By 1918, Denmark seemed to see the advantages, perhaps, and Iceland became a sovereign state, though still in a personal union with the Danish king.
Okay, so sovereign but sharing a monarch. How did World War I affect things?
Iceland managed to remain relatively untouched by the fighting itself, but these sources suggest the experience gave them a taste of the wider international instability that was brewing.
Right, and here's a key insight the sources offer. You can directly connect the final push for full independence to the aftermath of World War I.
Absolutely. The global instability, the economic uncertainty, the violence sweeping Europe, it all factored in.
And President Wilson's post-war ideas about self-determination.
Significant, but it came with a catch. It primarily applied to nations that were seagirt, which sounds like Iceland, but But it left Iceland in something of a gray area. The sources argue it was seen as too geographically minor, tucked away north of Britain, and perhaps politically too significant for the new League of Nations to pay much attention to.
So its location and size led to a kind of isolation?
Almost automatic isolation in this new world order, as one source puts it. Its unique voice was effectively drowned out, and the later collapse of the League's economic system only reinforced this.
Meanwhile, domestically, how was the independence struggle portrayed?
It was consciously framed, according to these documents, to fit those grand European narratives of states gaining freedom. It was portrayed as a victory won by national unity, by heroes, emphasizing shared race, ethnicity, language, and the long trials endured under Danish rule. A narrative strongly reinforced internally.
Okay, then comes World War II. That must have had a huge impact.
A fundamental impact. The military occupation, first by the British in May 1940, then taken over by the Americans in July 1941, completely changed the dynamic.
Oh, so?
It gave a powerful new impetus to the independence movement and dramatically increased political awareness across the population. It broke that isolation in a way.
And led to a decisive moment.
Yes. The formal denunciation of that 1904 Danish-Icelandic Treaty of Union in October 1943. Crucially, this happened while Denmark itself was still occupied by Germany.
A strategic moment.
Very much so. And this led directly to the climax, the declaration of a republic on June 17, 1944.
What was that like?
The sources paint a vivid picture. It took place in a parliament building made specifically of native Icelandic wood. There was a festive procession, people in folk costumes, waving ancestor flags.
A real national celebration.
But pointedly, no foreign guests were invited. It emphasized the domestic nature of the event.
And was it universally supported?
A nationwide referendum beforehand showed overwhelming support, apparently. Literally nobody voted against becoming independent. Those sources note there were significant debates just before about how and when to proclaim it, and whether to remain a monarchy or become a republic. The republic won, but maybe narrowly among those deciding the final form.
Interesting. And the Danish connection.
It ended quite undramatically in a way. The last Danish governor-general actually departed leisurely the week before the declaration, as there was no plan to replace him.
So, the end of an era.
Iceland officially became a republic on July 1st, 1947, concluding 601 years under foreign kings or monarchs.
Wow, 601 years. Okay, so nationhood achieved. What are the new constitutional framework?
Well, they adopted a new constitution in 1944. Sources suggest that while it included some progressive ideas like the potential for referenda, it was significantly revised during the drafting process, perhaps weakened to serve party interests.
Political realities.
Indeed. And interestingly, a Supreme Court ruling in 1945 apparently questioned its full legal validity, stating it was more a formal recognition of an existing sovereign state than a truly foundational document. This constitution stayed until a new one was adopted in 1995.
Okay. And Iceland steps onto the international stage.
Pretty quickly, yes. It was among the first states to join the UN in 1945. Later, it joined things like the North Atlantic Cooperation Council in 91, the Nordic Council.
Right.
And its growing aspirations towards European integration led to joining the European Economic Area, the EEA, and the Schengen Agreement in the early 90s.
Its international role became quite significant for its size, didn't it?
Surprisingly so.
Right.
Despite its well-known historical reluctance to spend on a military, its key geostrategic location made it a vital ally for the U.S. and NATO during the Cold War and beyond.
Geopolitics.
And more recently, it's carved out a niche as a leader in oceanic and environmental governance. Think of that significant 200-mile exclusive economic zone, the EEZ, they declared back in the 70s.
Controlling the fishing ground.
Exactly. And leading initiatives like the Blue Bioeconomy, hosting the UN Ocean Summit.
So its size and location continue to shape everything. Governance, politics, foreign policy.
They do. While it's a small state globally, it's actually the largest in the West Nordic region, bigger than the Faroes or Greenland, and it has guarded its independence much more resolutely than its neighbors.
How did it approach diplomacy as a small state?
Well, after WWI, its diplomacy often involved relying on neighbors like Denmark and the UK, and strongly advocating for the principle of sovereignty for all nations. This kind of contrasts with some academic theories like neorealism, which might suggest a state's influence is strictly tied to its size. Iceland sometimes seems to punch above its weight.
Interesting. Okay, let's look at the economy post-independence.
Sources show continued, often strong growth since WWI, averaging around 4% annually, which is pretty good. But
There's always a but.
There's always a but. This growth came with significant fluctuations, booms and busts, and a really unusual dependence on fish exports,
How dependent?
making up about 40% of export earnings between 1960 and 1996. That's huge.
Wow. Yeah, and fish is inherently unpredictable, right? Catches prices.
Exactly. And compounding this is aluminum, their second major export, which is also vulnerable to the ups and downs of the global metals market. Sources mention a boom in fishing capital investment in the mid-90s that ended pretty badly in a collapse.
So economic challenges like unemployment, inflation.
Yes, cyclical unemployment and inflation have been persistent issues. They tried things like pegging their currency to the German Deutschmark at one point, but a really significant shift came with joining the EEA in 1994.
The European Economic Area, how did that change things?
The sources describe it as a seismic shift. It forced legislative uniformity with Europe in many areas and really highlighted the critical need for a stable currency. It led to major banks being privatized and a complete shift in currency policy.
Okay. Moving into modern Iceland now.
Yeah.
One of its truly defining features and strengths has to be geothermal energy.
Oh, absolutely. The utilization is just unparalleled globally. Nearly every home and building in Reykjavik and the surrounding towns is heated using geothermal.
That's amazing.
It's their only significant indigenous energy source. And look at the numbers. Sources say about 61% of their energy comes from hydropower and a huge 36% from geothermal.
That's incredible. How does that compare elsewhere?
Well, the sources contrast this sharply with Europe, where geothermal is still mainly used for things like spas, not widely for power generation or district heating on this scale.
And is there potential for more?
Yes, they see significant potential in technologies like enhanced geothermal systems, EGS, which could tap deeper heat sources. District heating schemes powered by geothermal just dominate their energy landscape.
Okay. Now, here's a major modern development the sources really dig into. The tourism boom.
Ah, yes. The growth since around 2010 has been absolutely staggering. We're talking reaching 2.3 million international tourists recently. That's created a massive surge in tourism-related jobs.
But this boom isn't without serious problems, is it?
No, far from it. The vast majority of tourists concentrate on just a handful of key sites, the Golden Circle, the South Coast.
Right.
And this leads to really visible impacts. Degraded walking trails, damage to fragile environments like buried lava fields, serious issues with human waste disposal, pollution, even at supposedly protected national parks and sites.
That sounds worrying. And is it expected to continue?
Well, the sources warn that planned airport and cruise terminal expansions suggest an even bigger avalanche, as they put it, of tourists is coming.
An avalanche.
Yeah.
Is Iceland equipped to handle this?
That's the critical question. This situation seems to expose conflicting priorities. Our sources point to significant funding cuts for environmental protection agencies, conservation, waste management, anti-pollution efforts, starting from around 1995 onwards.
Cuts to environmental protection.
Yes, while at the same time, funding for tourism promotion absolutely exploded in the early 2000s.
So, promoting tourism heavily while maybe under-resourcing the protection of what tourists come to see?
That seems to be the concern raised. Based on these sources, there's real worry that with current funding and planning limitations, Iceland simply won't be able to manage this scale of growth or control the necessary infrastructure development sustainably.
It makes Iceland a kind of pressing case study, as one source puts it.
Exactly, a case study for the challenges of sudden massive tourism growth.
And environmental issues extend beyond just tourism impacts, right? Climate change.
Yes, the evidence is clear according to these documents. The ice caps are melting visibly, rainfall patterns are changing, storms seem to be becoming more severe.
How does this affect Iceland specifically?
It impacts their already fragile ecosystem. Even their renewable energy isn't immune. Hydropower is affected by changes in glacier melt and river flow. There's concern about methane release from thawing permafrost, which is a potent greenhouse gas.
And the oceans.
Sea level rise threatens coastal cities like Reykjavik, and changing sea temperatures and salinity are impacting crucial fish populations, which, as we discussed, are vital to their economy.
So these environmental pressures and the tourism dynamics, they're also tied into societal changes.
Yes, very much so. There's been a significant population shift towards Reykjavik. Over 2/3 of the population now lives in or around the capital area.
Creating divisions.
It seems to be creating widening divisions in wealth, in land ownership compared to remote areas where a simpler life and perhaps cleaner air still exist. Sources contrast the prevalence of renting in Reykjavik with the cherished goal of homeownership elsewhere.
So life is rearranging around opportunities, but
But the sources underscore that global warming poses a fundamental, dangerous consequence for the entire nation. And they also remind us of past environmental challenges, like struggles with unsustainable fishing quotas and the controversies around whaling.
yet, despite all these modern pressures, tourism, climate change, societal shifts, the core efforts at cultural preservation continue.
It seems so. Collecting folklore, preserving ancient manuscripts, the ongoing study of their unique history and language, these remain absolutely vital, according to the sources, to maintaining that distinct national identity forged over centuries.
So, to try and wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
Iceland's story is really quite extraordinary, isn't it?
It truly is. From this raw volcanic island settled by Vikings who somehow managed to create both a unique system of governance, the Althing, and this foundational vernacular literature.
Right, then enduring centuries of external rule, hardship, the devastation of the Black Death.
But then experiencing that powerful cultural renaissance where Icelanders actively rediscovered and reclaimed their heritage and identity.
Which in turn fueled a really determined struggle for independence, finally culminating in the Declaration of the Republic in 1944.
Exactly. And today, as a modern nation-state, it continues to find its place. Navigating globalization, the specific economic realities tied to fish and aluminum, and now facing these really significant environmental and tourism pressures.
It's a journey that seems fundamentally shaped by its dramatic geography and, well, the resourcefulness of its people. You see that especially in their incredible use of geothermal energy.
Absolutely. It's transformed from an isolated settlement into this resilient nation, constantly trying to balance its rich history and heritage with the demands and challenges of the modern world.
Okay. And as you, our listener, reflect on everything we've discussed about Iceland's journey, here's maybe a final thought to leave you with.
Yeah.
Given its long history of not just surviving, but actively adapting to extreme natural conditions and facing down significant external pressures, how will these powerful interconnected forces of rapid climate change and exponential tourism shape its unique identity and its future resilience?
That's the big question. What specific lessons from its past, its adaptability, its strong sense of identity might be most relevant as it navigates these very modern, very complex challenges?